May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Many years ago, I was involved in a week-long event for young people, and part of that event included a healing service one evening with very beautiful, calming, meditative, soulful music, and then an opportunity for us clergy who were present to pray for young people who had asked for prayers. It was a beautiful evening, and the spirit I felt, we all did. We clergy talked later about having a little tiny bit of the sense of the power of Jesus that we hear about in that gospel story of the healing of a woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years. Jesus felt that some of his power had gone out. We were worn out. The next day, one of the young people for whom I had prayed came up to me and said, "I just wanted to tell you that it worked." And he began to speak about receiving a sense of peace and healing and grace after those prayers. And I caught his love and his joy and was just feeling delighted about him and for him, and waited for him to say what I thought was coming next, which would be, "Thank you." But instead, he looked at me and said, "It's not you." And though I felt maybe a little bit deflated, I knew he was absolutely right. It was God who heals and transforms and changes. It is God who does that for our good, for goodness. Whenever we read the healing stories in the Gospels, and especially these two in Mark chapter 5, the healing of the woman who'd been sick for 12 years, sandwiched in between the beginning and the end of the raising of Jairus' daughter, I think about that story. It's not you, it's God. And so I am considering what it means for a community when healing and transformation happen to a person. What I mean by this is that the things we do when we are in the midst of sickness, those things are done for survival. We sometimes talk about the courage of those who suffer, but courage means that you have a choice, and those who suffer rarely have many choices, or good ones. And so I have no doubt that Jairus would have gone to any length to save his daughter. And I have no doubt that that woman spent 12 years suffering, in pain, worried, anxious, with her family probably with her, or perhaps rejecting her. We don't know. And so the boldness of her reaching out to touch Jesus and the boldness of Jairus asking for help, even though his daughter seemed to have died, those are real acts of desperation and hope in Jesus. Now, we have done hard and sometimes desperate things for the last 16 months. We have stayed home, we have stayed isolated, we have stayed away from our church buildings for longer than we ever thought possible. Some have been regathering for a while, some, like mine at St. Aidan's in Boulder, has just started regathering inside only recently. And so I do think about this, how, as we have all been a part of the healing of our country and the world, what kind of communities will we be as we regather, as we are transformed people in some way, as we are reconstituting and coming together again? You see, church communities can bring out the best and the worst in us. When we are the best, we are fulfilling what anthropologist Margaret Mead said. She said, "Don't ever doubt that a small group of dedicated people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." She's often quoted for saying that. I believe it to be true. I believe Jesus and his disciples might have agreed with her. And yet sometimes church communities come to expect the same out of people, not allowing room for change. Maybe there's that usher who's always grumpy, or that person who always complains about the coffee, or the person whose skin who looks like mine who just can't own up to the pain of systemic racism. There are hurts, both small and large, happening in our communities all the time. But we also believe in redemption and that people can change. What does it look like when we do? When we come to deeper understandings of ourselves and our world? When we come with humility to know that God has changed us for good? How does a community receive that? It is among the hardest and best work that I think churches do. I don't think I'm the only one wondering about this these days. Or maybe it's just that my household and we watched a lot of TV during the pandemic. It was one of the things we could do to get us out of the house, in a way. There's a couple of shows that are about sports. Sports are about teams and fighting for good and working hard, all of those good things. One of them, they're both on the Disney Channel, but this isn't an advertisement. One of them is called Big Shot. Another one is now the serial show called Mighty Ducks Game Changers. Big Shot is basketball, Mighty Ducks is hockey. And they both have to do with coaches who have made mistakes. One, in a fit of anger, threw a chair and finds himself, instead of being a celebrated college coach, he's now coaching high school girls basketball. The other is a hockey coach who made a wrong decision, was banned by the NC2A, and now he just runs a tiny little ice rink in a bad part of town. What's significant about this is that both of these coaches begin to change, to grow, to understand themselves differently, to understand indeed that they have made mistakes, and yet to try to seek healing or to be different. And what these shows show, and I highly recommend them, what these shows demonstrate also is that sometimes the community, in fact, always the community has to change also. In the basketball show, Big Shot, they have come to expect him to behave badly, and indeed, there's a little bit of celebrity in that. What's he going to do next? And so when he starts making different choices, no one knows what to do. In the other one, they're just used to this person being a failure and a has-been. But how can they receive that he still has something good in him? There's in the last episode, this isn't really a spoiler, so you can stick with me. One of the young people, one of the kids, says to a panel of judges, says, if we don't believe people can change, then why are we in this coaching biz at all? That's such a good lesson for churches. My hope as we regather, as we reconstitute our world, as we come out of this pandemic, as these online sermons are still a hallmark of that pandemic, but perhaps something will continue in the future. My hope is that we will allow all of those changes and transformations that we've felt to come to fruition in our lives, in our communities. Many people have said they have found the pandemic to have a gift, a silver lining of the reordering of priorities. What really matters? How do I want to spend my time? What are things I no longer want to do? What is the mission that matters most to us? My hope for our churches is that we can be communities that receive and celebrate and allow healed and changed people to be a new person. In fact, it is what the church is for. May God be with us, and may God keep you. Amen.